Great. We are going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very, very much for coming. I can see it's quite cramped back there, and I appreciate your willingness to be here in this tight squeeze. We do a lot of best practices research here at the Institute, and I'm starting to think that we may be studying the airline industry. But hopefully our new building on the mall will alleviate some of these pressures in the future. I'm Sheldon Himmelfarb, the head of our Center of Innovation for Media, Conflict, and Peace Building at the Institute of Peace. And we are one of two sponsors of today's event. Our terrific partner has been the Alliance of Civilization for Media Fund. The Alliance of Civilization Media Fund, I should say. A very impressive organization who you're going to hear a lot about today, as they are the commissioning body for the important research we're going to be discussing. And I've been very privileged to work closely with their executive director, Shamil Idris, here in organizing today's event. So thank you, Shamil, for your thought partnership all the way through. There's literature about both of our organizations out in the foyer. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Institute, maybe coming here for the first time, let me say we're an independent, nonpartisan, national institution established and funded by Congress 25 years ago to help prevent, manage, and resolve international conflict. And the role of the media has always been an interest of the Institute's, but it's taken on new urgency these last couple of years. Any number of studies, it's almost cliche to talk about the number of studies that tell us how media is saturating and shaping our lives. But we're also learning more all the time about the direct link between media and conflict. And in particular, about the role of media in the tension we've witnessed between the West and the Arab world. Media images of violence in Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, have been consistently implicated in the research on the radicalization of young Arab men. And let me quote the words of a former Palestinian militant himself. I think they really speak volumes. The difference, he said, between the first Intifada and the second is television. Before, I knew when we were attacked here or in a nearby camp, but the reality of the attacks everywhere else was not so clear. Now the TV brings them into my living room, and you can't turn them off. You can't ignore the problem. I could go on, but really, I'd like us to be focused on solutions because there's also plenty of research, as we're going to hear today, about the potential of media to promote better intergroup relations and tolerance. And so we have created this series at the Institute called Media as Global Diplomat to grapple with the profound implications of media, its role in conflict, its ubiquity, its role in public diplomacy, and relations between countries. Some of you will recall our first meeting in February, co-sponsored by the independent television service, ITVS, which focused attention on the ways the new administration could re-engage the world with a reinvigorated public diplomacy strategy. And at that meeting, and at several meetings since then on public diplomacy, we've heard lots of discussion about winning hearts and minds and about the importance of delivering positive messages to foreign publics about America in order to do that, to win those hearts and minds. But what does this really mean? What is a positive image, or a negative image for that matter? It became clear in listening to those conversations that we had very little fact-based information here to go on. What kinds of images, for example, promote more positive relationships or more negative relationships? What's the relative power, if you will, of images that depict stereotypes versus images that depict violence versus images that may depict humiliation? As we're going to see today, these are vitally important questions for which we are only beginning to have answers, thanks to advancements in brain imaging and other techniques that have literally allowed us to get inside people's heads. So while technology drives information and media relentlessly into every corner of the globe and our lives, we want to use today's meeting to pause and consider some new information about media and intergroup conflict. We talk a lot about hearts and minds, and today I hope we're going to leave here a bit wiser about both. We've got a great program. I'm going to get to it very quickly here. First, a bit of housekeeping. Let me remind folks to please set your cell phones on stun mode, or, in fact, turn them off entirely. I was just reading a study in a British medical journal, in fact, that said people who are doing email in meetings experience a drop in IQ of 10%. Well, wait a second. The study also showed that there was only a 7% drop in IQ if you smoked marijuana. So it's really disconcerting information to me. Seriously, though, we'd like everybody here in the room to please, focus, lean into today's discussion. Our moderators have promised there will be time for questions, both here in the room as well as for those of you who are watching online. We are streaming live on the USIP website, www.usip.org. And also, if you're planning to post on Twitter, the official hashtag, Joel, is?
MAGD.
MAGD is the official hashtag, Media as Global Diplomat. We also don't want folks in the room here to miss out on that online discussion. We know from past experience it's going to be pretty interesting. We've had 20 to 30 countries tuning into our last couple of events here. So Joel Whitaker, my colleague here, and Anand Varghese, they're both moderating the online discussion. And Joel's going to give us a sense of what people are saying online from time to time and pass questions to our moderators that the folks online are asking of our panel. So this is practicing global outreach here. And with that, let me hand the podium over to Ambassador Richard Solomon to introduce Her Majesty Queen Noor. Ambassador Solomon is the president of the United States Institute of Peace and someone who has been hammering away on the importance of studying the media's role in conflict long before most people in this field were. So, Dick?
Thanks very much, and we're obviously delighted to have a very full house. And as Sheldon indicated, we obviously need more space, and hopefully in a year and a half we'll be able to welcome you in a much larger conference facility. Let me just pick up with some very brief comments on what I think is one of our most exciting centers of innovation, the work that Sheldon is leading on the role of media technology and its relationship to international conflict and peace building. I think we all know somewhere in our heads about the power of communication technologies as agents of change. I mean, in our own history, the role of the telegraph, radio, television, and in the last several decades, the power of new media, the internet in particular, but now Twittering, tweeting, and Facebook, all these new social networking technologies. And our society is in a very interesting period of adapting to the use of these technologies. And frankly, our government is really straining to figure out how to use them for its purposes. And I would say it's not too much of an overstatement to say that our public diplomacy work has been a notable failure, particularly as we're trying to reach out to what are very hostile publics in certain parts of the world. And we began to look at the impact of the internet in the early 90s when it made that transformation from the ARPANET as a defense technology to one that is now, as we know, blown open wide, the way that everybody works and communicates. And we thought, hey, it's a great medium for pulling together communities that normally don't work together. In our case, the role of NGO, humanitarian assistance organizations who had to cooperate with our military on issues like the tsunami relief operations, the impact of efforts to help victims of earthquakes. These two communities were not used to working together, and the internet gave them a way to communicate. The unfortunate thing is that all technologies cut both ways, and we soon discover in the mid-90s that the bad guys were starting to use the internet for their purposes. And we published a book called Terror on the Internet, which looked at the way that terrorist organizations were communicating, raising money, coordinating their operations through the use of these technologies. So today's effort is one of our programs that focus on, hopefully, ways of understanding how these new media work in the interest of better management of conflict. And we're exceptionally pleased to have a very well-informed turnout of panelists headed by someone whose career is probably distinguished by an aspect that we don't really know about. But Lisa Najib Halaby was a high school classmate of our own Pamela Aul, who leads our program in education and training work. But of course, she's known to the world as Queen Noor of Jordan. She was the first American-born queen of an Arab country, and through her marriage to a man who was a great peacemaker in his part of the world, King Hussein of Jordan, has really distinguished herself by trying to bridge understanding between the Arab-Muslim world and non-Muslim countries. She was a co-founder of the Alliance of Civilizations, which Sheldon mentioned a moment earlier, and it's in that context that we're extremely pleased to have her as our keynote for this morning. So, Queen Noor, we're honored to have you with us. Please come to the podium.
I'm not sure if I should be standing here with a joint in hand or not, but were you recommending marijuana over self-texting in meetings, or what? I was confused. I want to find out more later. Ambassador Solomon and Sheldon Himmelfarb and the United States Institute of Peace, thank you for organizing this we believe, important event in partnership with the Alliance of Civilizations Media Fund. And thank all of you for being here. I especially want to thank our hosts for dedicating this second event in the Media as Global Diplomat series to a discussion of cutting-edge research that is exploring how media influences identity formation and the dynamic of intergroup and intercultural relations. Media is increasingly present in our lives and in the lives of our children, and it is therefore vital that we understand the impact that we are having on one another when we tell stories, report news, or provide a megaphone for diverse opinions expressed through any number of proliferating media formats and platforms. But the broader question that we're tackling today is extremely important to me on both a personal and professional level. How do we individually and collectively navigate and reconcile our diverse identities? My own life story begs me to consider this question on almost a daily basis. And I know that it must be on the minds of countless people around the world who are of mixed cultural and religious or other heritage. The Alliance of Civilizations Media Fund is in fact the brainchild of the conversations, concerns, and dreams of several such multicultural heirs, mongrels, mutts, crossbreeds, however. I was trying to find the perfect word in the thesaurus last night. I couldn't. But its founders are Arab, Muslim, and Euro-Americans. This issue has been raised in starkest relief in recent years in the context of relations between Western and predominantly Muslim societies, as you just heard. And it is perhaps in that context that I have confronted it most directly. I am an Arab American by birth, granddaughter of Orthodox Christian Syrian immigrants to the Americas at the turn of the last century. I was raised in a Judeo-Christian society, educated in the West, and married and became a Muslim when I married in 1978. So for over 30 years, I have endeavored to build bridges between these different worlds. I'm just one of millions for whom the Western and Islamic cultures are not mutually distinct entities destined for confrontation, but rather wholly constituent and constituent parts of consistent and constituent parts of who I am and what I believe. When I married, reporters were constantly asking me, how could an educated, liberated American woman go live in such a repressive culture? They didn't know the Arab women I did, the doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, professors, many of whom became friends and trusted advisors as I set my priorities for public service. And they certainly did not know my husband. King Hussein was that rarity among leaders, a Hashemite direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He understood his temporal role and responsibilities through this spiritual lens, as that of public servant rather than absolute ruler. He believed deeply and passionately in authentic Islamic values such as tolerance and pluralism, social equity and gender equality, consensus building, and above all, in peace. He promoted social justice, political participation, and economic progress in ways consistent with Islamic and Arab values. And most of all, he understood that one could be a citizen of the world and remain a devoted member of one's own country, culture, and faith. And yet this understanding and harmony remains elusive at the societal level. In our increasingly media-saturated world, it is perhaps unsurprising that some of the events that most challenge our capacities for tolerance and understanding are not only troubling events covered by the media, but also the almost manufactured crises that are generated by some media outlets, be they cartoons printed in a Danish newspaper, a DVD circulated in American newspapers prior to last year's presidential election, or the giving of a platform to extremist, almost violent voices on talk shows. Polls show that the media is at the core of perceptions and misperceptions that contribute to tension between Western and predominantly Muslim societies. In a 2006 Gallup poll, Middle Eastern respondents were asked, what can the West do to promote better relations? An overwhelming 47% of respondents said, stop disrespect. There were a number of criteria, that's why that was an overwhelming figure. Said, stop disrespecting our religion and stop portraying us like we are inferior. Negative stereotypes have the power to humiliate, especially when continuously reinforced by popular culture. They can set the emotional and political stage for policies that reinforce misunderstanding, which can lead to conflict and even war. And in my peace-building efforts around the world, I have seen the consequences of media used to promote intolerance, hatred, and violence, from here in the U.S. to the battlefields of the Middle East, Northern Ireland, the Balkans, Africa, and elsewhere. One example. In 2006, 11 years after the end of violent conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, while launching a United World College, a secondary school, in Mostar, I was stunned to discover that this school continues to be the only school in the country which integrates students and teachers from all three ethnic communities in the classroom. A tragic and dangerous reflection of an environment in which the media continues to pit ethnic and religious groups against each other, dangerously exacerbating right now tensions in the lead up to the 2010 elections. The students that I spent time with there from all these different communities were so happy to be together. They were energized, they were comforted, they were motivated, and I'm afraid I encourage them to become revolutionary in the impact that they might have on their societies, on their communities, and on their political leadership. Because what they were reflecting was a fundamental, I think, human instinct that is not reflected in what is in fact a deteriorating situation today in that community. I digress a bit, but the media also has the power to support their basic instincts, to humanize those who are different, and it needs to become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. By shedding light on the unfamiliar and exposing realities of events as lived by the other, both news and entertainment media can foster empathy, tolerance, and reconciliation. And that is why the King Hussein Foundation, which I chair, introduced a Media and Humanity program during the Tribeca Film Festival in 2007 to try to support access to films and media projects that highlight shared values and aspirations across social, economic, and political divides, with special emphasis on the Middle East and Muslim world. It is also the reason why I helped to found the Alliance of Civilizations Media Fund, and why I'm so pleased to be here today with our executive director, Shamal Idris, Professor Rebecca Sachs, who led the MIT portion of our research, Jay Winston from Harvard and Cynthia Schneider from Brookings, who've been so supportive in providing advice during the fund's foundational period. I really do look forward to hearing the perspectives of the distinguished media professionals, policymakers, researchers, and advocates who are with us today. As today's discussions get underway, I would like to offer with all humility a few observations and suggestions drawn from my own experiences. First, let us not overestimate the role that media plays in polarizing our societies. After all, the problems that divide us are not simply ones of perception. There are real political conflicts that require real political solutions. I know from the tireless efforts of my late husband that in trying to build peace, nothing substitutes for political will and courage. So as we explore the impact that media's projection of violence, despair, and conflict have on relations across cultures, let us always keep in mind that it is the persistent presence of these conditions, and not merely the broadcasting of them, that is at the core of what plagues us. At the same time, let us not underestimate the role that media could play in reconciling and stabilizing our societies. After all, in the absence of direct contact with cultures, beliefs, and worldviews different from our own, and you even see this in the United States, it is the media's portrayal of them that most directly shapes whether we see cultural diversity as a blessing to be embraced or a threat to be confronted. News broadcasters often say that they are only showing the world as it is, and commercial media producers often say they are only giving their audiences what they want to see. But those who report the news are public servants in the most obvious sense. We rely on them to tell us what we need to know about the world, not the other way around. They have a special responsibility to the public, which certainly deserves our consideration, analysis, and discussion. Finally, I would like to note a simple paradox. So much discussion of the media centers around what is broadcast, how it is disseminated, and whether it reaches the most critical or at-risk audiences. But in all my years of working around the world, I have found that listening is usually more important than talking. Oftentimes, it is less about what you say and how you say it than genuinely hearing what others are trying to communicate. And so I ask out of genuine curiosity and concern, is there a place for the media industry and public diplomacy and the public diplomacy policy-making community to help us listen to the stories of others? Or are we only concerned with making sure they hear our stories? Again, I look forward to hearing what the speakers on the first panel have to say regarding the results of some of the latest research that is exploring how media influences our thinking about ourselves and about others. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that we may all come to a better understanding of media's impact on our attitudes and behaviors without changing a single thing about what media outlets actually produce and disseminate. Because without understanding the commercial and in some cases political pressures that confront media producers and broadcasters, not to mention the new challenges brought by the advent and rapid proliferation of new media technologies and platforms, it will be hard for us to know whether the implications of the research that is being reported upon here will have any resonance with those who determine what gets produced and broadcast. So I will be equally interested to hear from the second panel of media producers and professionals, some of whom are trying to apply their trade to fostering greater cross-cultural understanding and respect. What implications they think that these research findings might have for the work that they do and for their peers in the film, television, and new media industries. So with those few thoughts, I want to reiterate my sincere gratitude to our hosts for providing us this opportunity and for giving priority to this conversation. I look forward to today's discussion, and again, I thank all of you for being here and taking part in it with us today. Thank you.